These group of cave explorers were trapped underwater long enough for the water in the cave to fill up in their lungs, eventually suffocating them to death, with no one being able to hear them scream. And I'm talking about none other than the Golem Cave incident. Okay, so it's August 2005 and 6 young adults from Provo, Utah had dinner and drinks on the night of the 16th. Their names were Steve Hundley, who was 20 years old, Jennifer Galbraith, 21, Ariel Singer, 18, Blake Donner, 24, Scott McDonald, 28, and Joseph Ferguson, 26. For anyone that was curious. And oh, by the way, Jennifer and Blake were students at BYU and were actually dating as well. That night, as they laughed and joked, one of the kids, Jennifer, started talking about the Golem Cave, located in the side of Y Mountain, which was conveniently not too far of a hike from the campus. Quick side note, this cave had actually been mapped out 1 year prior by expert cave explorers. Their names were Spencer Coles and Judd Zimmerman, who made a pretty detailed drawing of the inside of the cave. After playing a 15-minute game of no, you go first, before actually going inside. That's how terrifying this cave was. Now, these kids, who barely even knew how to hike, were going to attempt what 2 experts almost died doing. Get this though, Jennifer actually had been to the cave before, and the group sat around laughing and making fun of her on how last time she'd passed out and became hyperthermic the last time she went through. Listen, I don't know what you guys and your friends, joke about, but I don't think passing out is, that funny. But hey, I guess some of us have a dark sense of humor. Okay, wait, because of this, while ordering another round of drinks, Steve nicknamed it the Cave of Death. Morbidly ironic because they had no idea how right they were. With little to no sleep, the group decided to go up on the mountain to the dangerous cave at 4 in the morning the next day. Steve, who must have had a test in the morning or something, decided not to go. The group of the other 5 friends climbed Y Mountain until they reached the entrance of the cave. Once at the mouth of the cave, the group waited around trying to give each other pep talks to actually enter the Cave of Death. Because this is what the entrance actually looks like. Yeah, inviting, am I right? Well, Joseph probably thought so too, because I think he looked at the group and said something like, "Absolutely the booty butt not." Then popped a squat and cracked open his nice cold beer. Go ahead, I'm good here, I'll be on lookout. But Joseph, hard-headed about this whole idea being stupid, didn't move at all, and just sipped a nice cold one and gave them the finger. Okay. I don't know if it actually went down like that, but all I know is that Joseph didn't enter the cave and was the lookout for the group. At 4:30 in the morning before sunrise, when honestly they probably should have been asleep, Jennifer, her boyfriend Blake, Ariel, and Scott approached the entrance nervously. The entrance was small, about 2 by 4 foot entrance, jagged and a strange kind of angle. Then once inside, the group needed to travel close to 100 feet through the slippery, tight passages, squeezing into a tiny hole in the floor. Yeah, you heard me right. You had to lower yourself into this one person at a time. Oh, no. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't do this either. Who wants to squeeze into an 18 by 24 inch water-filled hole? Oh, now 18 inches is too small, huh? Anyways, it was 4 feet down to another passage completely submerged in water to get to a chamber on the other side of the cave. Now, there was actually a rope that attached to a rock for when they wanted to turn around and head back to the entrance, where our main man Joseph was standing. But as you would expect, it was very hard to find the rope in the dark underwater, and it basically became plastered to all the rocks in the cave from the grime and algae buildup. Oh, and I forgot to mention this horrifying fact. The entrance hole has a dead end 4 feet past the hole on the return trip. And so you don't get confused, this is what I'm talking about. A guy named Brian Lemprey, a previous caver, said that he overshot the exit hole and thought he was for sure going to die. Yep, guys, this cave sounds like a lot of fun. Yippee! Anyways, all 4 of the kids made the tight, completely submerged swim through the pitch black water to the chamber on the other side. They yelled and splashed each other, filled with adrenaline, and just yelled out in excitement. But the cave was finished with their fun, and I guess you can kind of say it was stone cold. Too soon? Okay, before we continue, let me give you boxheads a quick science lesson. The normal oxygen percentage of air you breathe, in the real world is about 20 to 21%. The rest is just nitrogen and carbon dioxide. Alright, so the term hypoxia refers to the brain not receiving enough oxygen despite breathing normally. It can lead to confusion, disorientation, passing out, and eventually death. This can happen at high altitudes where the air is thin or in confined spaces like, the cave, when the oxygen is running out.
Oh, actually funny that you mentioned that because...
Blah, blah, blah is probably what you're thinking right now, but I'm telling you, all of this is going to come in play in about 30 seconds. So the group decided that they wanted to head back through the tunnel and leave the cave because they couldn't actually breathe properly. Jennifer starts her swim back first. She begins the dive, leaving her 3 friends behind, thinking she was going to be laughing with them again in just a few moments. Well, the cave had other plans. Jennifer reaches up for the exit hole, but it's not there. She feels like a rock and then she gasps, which is when Jennifer realizes in horror that she couldn't find her way out. As her lungs start to fill up with water, in her final moments she's scrambling, desperately looking for this damn hole. And suddenly, everything went black. Now you're probably thinking that 15 feet isn't much of a swim, but there were 4 of them in a super confined space with limited oxygen. Next up to try and swim back and exit this cave was Ariel. The boys must have known to let the ladies go first or something, I don't know. Ariel spent slightly more time in the cave than Jennifer, so she already couldn't breathe as good, and by the way, Jennifer had already passed out herself in front of them. But remember, it's super dark in this cave, so they don't even know that she passed out yet. Trust me, that's gonna be really important in about like 15 seconds. By the way, now the entire group has been in the cave so long, they were starting to exhibit signs of hypoxia, which again leads to disorientation and eventually death if not dealt with immediately. Ariel starts to swim through the pitch black cave as she starts to run out of breath. And she swims straight into the stiff body of Jennifer, who was now completely unconscious, and also blocking the only way out of the damn cave. Ariel frantically tried to push her out of the way, but nothing. Ariel now gasping underwater, scrambling, trying to find a way around her passed out friend. She gasps again, but this time choking down water, and she too then blacked out. Back in the chamber, the 2 boys, now becoming severely hypoxic from the bad air quality, had no idea that the 2 girls in front of them had drowned. And also they had no idea they were blocking the I almost said a bad word. Blocking the exit. Anyways, now Blake was next. And imagine his horror when he found 2 of his friends, one of which was his own girlfriend, drowned and blocking the only way out. Yeah, I get claustrophobic just writing this. He tried to push through them, he slammed his body against theirs, screaming and screaming underwater, trying to force their bodies to move. Behind him came Scott, who suffered the most hypoxia in the chamber alone. Reaches him, but it was far too late. And the 4 friends, unable to move each other's bodies through the tight space, all drowned in the narrow passage, suffering one of the most painful deaths a human could goddamn experience. And guys, at around 5 in the morning on August 17th, 2005, the Golem Cave, or the Cave of Death, would become their tomb. Now hold on, let me take you back outside the cave. Remember our boy Joseph? Yeah, he's still there. And Joseph had been so worried as they've been gone for quite a while now. At around 5:30 a.m. or just an hour after his friends left, he picked up his phone and began calling people who knew about this cave. I'm sure being woken up at 5:30 in the morning by someone asking about a goddamn cave is not annoying at all. Sarcasm boxheads, it's all sarcasm, please do not torture me. Anyways, at 6:30 with his friends still not back, Joseph became even more worried. I mean, rightfully so. Where the hell are his friends? I mean, we know what happened, but, think about his spot. The sun was coming up and he was still waiting outside all alone in the cold with none of his friends in sight. Which is when he finally realized that his friends might not be coming back at all. In a hurry, he grabbed his phone and called 911. The police quickly arrived at the scene where they organized a rescue team for the kids inside the cave. Nearly 3 hours had passed since the kids first entered the cave. Knowing this, the cops knew they had to work fast, which is when they began quickly pumping fresh oxygen into the cave. Just in case they were alive and running out of air. Next, in order to provide a safe rescue, they began pumping out the water for the rescuers to enter. Once the water level dropped to about 2 feet, they found Jennifer's lifeless body, just floating and cold to touch. It was also soaking wet and cuts on her hands from desperately trying to claw her way out. Another hour later, they found the 3 remaining bodies, in the order of how they were trying to leave. After this whole incident, the cave was then filled up with concrete to prevent anyone else from losing their lives to this cave. Also, memorials have been placed in order to, honor the victims. And now no one else will die in the Cave of Death. Next up is the Nutty Putty Cave incident. A pretty silly name for what trapped a man for 19 hours, eventually killing him. Before we get into that though, I wanted to do something a little bit fun to, brighten up the mood. The least liked comment, so the comment with literally no likes on this video will get $10. And I'll choose the winner in 7 days. And the only rule is you have to be subscribed to the channel. The Nutty Putty Cave is a tight, narrow, and slippery maze of passageways located in Utah. It was a twisted, literally, challenge for anyone daring enough to enter. But yet, people still did so. Here is John Edwards Jones, who was 26 years old and actually had lots of caving experience from when he was a kid. At this point of his life, he was studying to become a cardiologist, had recently become a father, and his wife, Emily, was pregnant with their 2nd child. But unfortunately, he would never get to see her grow up. Yeah, let's just get right into it. On November 24th, 2009, John and his brother Josh were talking about the good old days of splunking with their dad. That's caving for you guys that, don't know. The two then decided to go caving again for the first time in years, and picked the Nutty Putty Cave. But if only John knew what was going to happen to him, he would have never gone inside, I swear. It was 8 p.m. just a few days before Thanksgiving. 9 friends, including John and Josh, grouped up with their caving gear. I'm talking about helmets, lights, ropes, Cliff Bars, and balls the size of goddamn grapefruits for what they were going to attempt. Ready to explore the inside of this cave. Can I just say that after researching for this video, I will never, ever enter the inside of a goddamn cave. Alright, but let's fast forward a little bit. For about an hour, everything was going smoothly, everyone was laughing and having a good time. Okay, I think this is a good time to explain the whole layout of the Nutty Putty Cave, because it's actually kind of like jaggedy and just confusing. The cave spans a length and depth of 1,355 and 145 feet respectively. Oh, and this boy had many paths, dead ends, and pockets inside. Here on the screen is actually a diagram of the Nutty Putty Cave itself. I mean, look at this. All the names were like strange. I mean, what the hell is a birth canal? Alright, we had enough fun looking at the nut. Let's fast forward a bit to where John, his brother Josh, and 11 others were in the cave. It was around 9 p.m. when the group had explored the biggest room of the cave. This, if you remember from the diagram, is called the Big Slide, located right here. And as you probably guessed, this is where things went from a fun adventure to a deadly nightmare of claustrophobic proportions. And if tight spaces freak you out, you may want to leave the video right now. I warned you. John and his brother Josh, not satisfied with the touristy area of the cave, decided to take up a challenge of passing through what is called the birth canal, the funny name I mentioned earlier. A very tight squeeze that was supposed to open up into a larger room. Noticed how I said supposed to? John, obviously being the older brother, went first. He got on his belly and he crawled through the tight squeeze. Careful not to breathe too fast because, as experienced cavers know, rapid breathing actually expands your chest, making it harder to get through tight spaces. So being all calm is the only way to shrink down small enough to get through these very, very narrow places. And I know, you're probably thinking, hey Boxhead, I'm never gonna do this. Why are you even mentioning it? Well, my fellow, hopefully subscriber, I'm glad you asked. It's all about to make sense, young Padawan. Okay, so remember how we said the birth canal is supposed to push into a larger space? Well, John realized, it's not really doing that. Yeah, instead he was getting more and more restricted. In other words, he couldn't really move much. Barely, or even at all. As the tunnel got smaller and smaller, John started to realize what happened. He may have made a wrong turn. The correct turn was about 50 feet back where he came from. And John, now facing the complete wrong way in a super tight space, couldn't really, turn back. By the way, remember that he was supposed to keep calm or his lungs would expand. And he'll be completely stuck for sure at that point. To show you on the map, the birth canal is right here, and he's supposed to end up somewhere over here, and went the complete wrong way into what is called the Ed's push. And Ed's push does not exactly lead into a larger room. In fact, Ed's push doesn't lead anywhere. Now, I forgot to mention, John is 6 feet tall and about 200 pounds. So in the middle of this tight, space, he can't exactly just turn around. I mean, he's stuck. So John, now starting to get a little bit anxious, tries to make his way further, forward. But again, this is the wrong way and he knows that. Honestly, I think he was just hoping that the cave would expand a little bit so that he could turn around and go the right way. John pushed his way deeper until the worst possible thing ever happened. A very terrified and scared John could no longer move. Not only that, but he found his way into a nearly vertical 10 by 18 inch hole in the cave that was already so narrow you couldn't breathe too hard to get through. Yeah, you heard me. He is now trapped 100 feet in the goddamn ground, upside down, head first, in a solid rock hole and literally cannot move. Holy crap, I would be scared too. Now, all he could do is honestly pray. Somewhere behind him in this path was his brother Josh, who located him and was horrified by how trapped his brother was. Josh tried to free his brother, but he could only inch him slightly, but even that wasn't enough because when he let go, his brother would just slip right back into the hole. I mean, seriously, there was no way he could get his brother out alone. They both said a quick prayer and it was time to rescue this guy. Josh somehow made his way as quick as possible out of the cave, sweating and scrambling but trying to remain calm. Once outside, he called 911 and the rescue mission was about to begin. The first person on the scene was a rescue volunteer named Susan. She pulled up in her little Toyota with the tire screech so loud you could probably hear it inside the cave. She got the gear on and bravely went inside to find John, who, yes, was very much still stuck in the hole. Alright, from here on out, John's in the hole. He didn't move, he didn't escape, he's stuck. Susan reached John and probably said something like, "Hey John, how are you?" Because what else do you really say to a man who's fearing for his life stuck vertically headfirst in the rock? And John, who's looking at her using his feet, says something like, "Thanks for coming, but I really just want to get out." Thank God Susan didn't work for the insurance company or she would have found a way to say, "Sorry, hole removal isn't a part of your policy." Okay, I know it's not time for jokes. I just really wanted to say that. The next few hours were crucial. The rescue team worked through the night coming up with plan after plan. One plan even had them lubing up the walls of the damn cave. I'm sure you boxheads know a thing or two about lubing up. Again, not time for jokes, my bad. Anyways, they eventually decided to use a type of rescue rope that passes through a series of devices that allow the rope to not be caught on any of the cave walls, which can then be used to tie around John's feet. They also brought in a drill. Yeah, that's right, they were going to try and drill away the rock all the way down to him. But after several hours, the drill only got through a few inches of the rock. And to show you what it kind of looks like, here's a real picture of this attempt. The tight squeeze of the cave, as I'm sure you guessed, made things very hard on the rescue team. And even with a very large number of rescue workers and even a helicopter outside, only one person could reach John at once, because that's how small the hole was. Anyways, let's actually go back to John, who, as I mentioned earlier, is still doing his best impression of a goddamn gopher. At this point, he has been upside down, stuck like this for about 19 straight hours. Blood rushing to the brain, organs pressing against each other, and breathing became much, much harder for him. And to make things even worse, he was beginning to hallucinate. Hold on, but the team actually brought a two-way radio so that he could talk to his pregnant wife. Yeah, remember her? The emotional couple didn't know this, but they would be sharing their last moments together over a goddamn walkie-talkie. I know, man, that's just sad. For a moment, things did start to improve and the pulley system was working. And the team started to chant, 1, 2, 3, heave! 1, 2, 3, heave! John was coming loose and the mood started to lift as John ascended from the hole. He was getting closer and closer and everyone could just feel it. He was going to get out. The team literally had blisters. It was so hot and humid in this narrow cave. Everyone was in pain, especially John. But just as they thought they were out of the woods, the worst imaginable thing happened. Suddenly, the entire team fell backwards and the rope just loosened. The rescuer closest to John was hit in the head out of nowhere, and he blacked out. The cave started to fill with dust and the entire team had no idea what the hell just happened. Report! They yelled over the walkie-talkies. Nothing.
Man, come the bleep on.
Again, the rescuer closest to John started to open his eyes. He'd just been knocked out. A little bit groggily, he looks around and responds to the radio. Surrounded in the dust and blood rushing down from his face, he looks around and realizes in horror of what just happened. The pulley that was carrying the bulk of John's weight had come loose and shattered the rocks around him, which struck him in the face. And even worse than that, John had fallen even deeper into the hole than where he was before. The rescuer had been knocked out and suffered severe facial injuries. So he could no longer continue, and they switched places with none other than John's father, who was also on the rescue team, being the one who trained John in the first place. When he reached his son, he was horrified that his breathing had slowed down, and John was struggling to stay awake. A rescuer tried to call out to John, but there was no response heard. And guys, no one was to ever hear from John again. After 137 rescuers and 27 hours, a medical professional arrived and crawled into the cave to confirm that, in fact, on November 25th, 2009, 26-year-old John was in fact dead. The next day, the authorities determined it was too dangerous to retrieve the 26-year-old's body, and the Nutty Putty Cave became the gravesite of John Edward Jones. Just 1 week later, after this whole incident, the cave was closed forever, sealed with concrete with the memorial of John where the entrance once stood. Now let's talk about the cave disaster that involved the authorities leaving the bodies of 2 men trapped underwater to rot away at the bottom of a cave. Yup, I saved the craziest story for last, and I'm talking about none other than the Plura Cave disaster. But first, let me give you some background information so you're not confused. Our crew consists of Kai, a 46-year-old electrical contractor, Patrick, a 42-year-old fireman, Yari H, a 40-year-old production manager, Vesa, a 33-year-old electrical designer, and Yari Yu, a 34-year-old mechanical engineer. One day, they packed everything but a goddamn kitchen sink into Yari's van, which is deadass hauling a trailer full of diving gear, a snowmobile, underwater scooters, a metric shit ton of diving cylinders. Basically, it's enough diving gear to make you think that these guys were Navy SEALs or something. Seriously, look at these pictures, it's absolutely nuts. By the time they arrive, it's past 1 in the morning on February 6th. The road has been hard to drive, with the van sliding around on the icy highways. Remember, it's wintertime in one of the coldest places in the world. But hey, I guess they made it. Kai kills the engine and the 5 men hop out of the van into the cold air. The plan was complete, what they called a traverse of the Plura Cave, which basically means they were entering through a pond and exiting through a dry but hard to reach, wait, let me try to pronounce this, Stenuflaget, which is the cave's name, and I'm just gonna pop up the word because how in the world did you expect me to pronounce this? Come on, can you even pronounce this? The cave descends over 130 meters, with several tight squeezes and cold as balls water temperatures. And I'm over here huffing and puffing with sadness if my shower runs out of hot water. Kai and Patrick were actually the veterans of the group, having discovered the connection between the 2 entrances and being among the first to ever traverse it. The others had experience in the Plura caves, but has never gone this deep in. Yuri Yu just flat out has never been to a cave. Yeah, it was not going to be a fun time for this young man. Anyways, the group had hashed out the dive details during the long drive. The plan was simple, but yet very, very dangerous. Dive through the cave, leave their equipment near the entrance, return the next day, and dive back. Sounds simple enough, right? They would all spend the night at the Jordbrew farm and leave their gear to stay, warm in the garage. On the morning of February 6th, Patrick had gone out for a run to check the ice conditions at the pond. The group split up. Kai, Vesa, Yuri Yu carried the equipment to the S cave, while Patrick and Yuri H cut a hole into the ice with a chainsaw. By the way, snow covered everything, but the group was, still in a great mood. There was actually footage shot by Patrick himself that shows the 2 men chatting as they suited up to dive inside this, hole. The water under the ice was crystal clear, revealing a rocky bottom. It was breathtaking. Some would say in more ways than one. Also, it was freezing, but I don't think I needed to tell you that. As Patrick and Yari H slipped into the water, their friends arrived to see them off. They used underwater scooters to save energy, gliding through the ice-cold water like Navy SEALs. Or actual SEALs, I mean, take your pick. Now, it's important to note that they were using what is called rebreathers or closed-circuit systems. The difference is, instead of carbon dioxide being exhaled, it's cycled back into the system, allowing for fewer cylinders. Basically, it allows the divers to go into tighter areas. The rebreather system comes with a computer on the wrist displaying life-saving data of the dive. And I know what you're already thinking. Box said, bro, this is like blah blah blah, we get it. But trust me, this is going to be really important. Because rebreathers also entail a larger risk. A lot can actually go wrong. But to keep it simple, if the gases don't mix right, the diver can suffer hypoxia or carbon dioxide poisoning, which hundreds of meters below the surface is not good to say the least. And if you already forgot, confusion, panic, and eventually death is what you're gonna get. So Patrick and Yari H are already ahead of the three others by a couple hours. Splitting up actually made it easier to see because it's pitch black down there and you don't want the sand stirring up. The two men were in complete awe with the beauty of this cave, but their fun was coming to an end. It all went wrong at a sharp 90-degree angle at the near bottom of the dive. Patrick made it around the corner first, a super tight squeeze, but he was fine. Yari H though was not so lucky. Patrick realized that as he was swimming, he wasn't with his partner anymore, so he looks back. The light from Yari's headlamp was moving all over the place, like an underwater rave. Patrick makes the tight squeeze and turns around to see what the problem was, and Yari H reached out to Patrick. He was clearly panicked. He signaled to Patrick to give him the backup tank of bailout gas. He switched between his breather and the bailout gas about 3 times. And obviously, I don't need to tell you this, but panicking deep underwater is never good. From here though, things get fuzzy. Patrick reports he handed Yari H the mouthpiece from his cylinder and pressed the purge button. But in his panicked state, Yari inhaled too soon and sucked down cave water instead of the air. Within seconds, it was all over. Patrick watched in horror as his friend drowned right in front of him. Pretty messed up, right? Patrick then looks at his dive computer and realizes that he has to move now, or he might just face the same fate and run out of oxygen. Now, there's this horrible other threat that I completely forgot to mention. Get this, it's called decompression sickness, or the Benz. And I ain't talking about the Mercedes. Basically, the deeper underwater you go, the pressure builds up rapidly. And when you come back up, you need to decompress properly or you will die from nitrogen buildup in your blood. Now get this, each minute at this depth requires 10 minutes in many different stops for proper, recompression. Yeah, there's a lot to think about when you're this deep in the water, or cave, I guess. Well, when you're running out of air, you can't just sit around forever. So back to that dive computer, get this. It read that he would need to be in the water for 7 freaking hours to safely resurface. Holy crap-a-mole, he probably thinks to himself. How long have I been down here? He thinks about the other 3 who had certainly started their dive by now, and we're going to eventually run into Yari H's body, who now blocked the path. He was certain that, his other friends were all gonna die too. But regardless, he had to save himself. So he continued on to the S cave. By the way, it's not actually called the S cave. You know why I'm calling it that, because I can't pronounce the other name. Okay, now the other 3, Vesa, Yari Yu, and Kai, had been diving for a bit now. And they were approaching the site where Yari H's lifeless body was just floating and blocking the path. On their way, Vesa heard something in the distance. It sounded like a distress signal. Vesa approaches slowly. He couldn't really make out what it was. Vesa gasped, like he could not believe what he was seeing. It was the body of Yari H, and the beeping was coming from his breathing gear failing. Patrick was nowhere to be seen. Vesa was starting to freak out, gasping and clutching onto a rock. He knew that he would have to collect himself, or else he was going to end up dead too. He slowly removes his gear, carefully making his way around Yari's dead body. Okay, also, he doesn't know how far behind his other friends were, but all he knew is he needs to get the heck out of this cave right now. Hold on, let's recap. Vesa was ahead of Kai and Yari Yu. Yari H had already drowned, he's packed up, and Patrick had gone ahead to the S cave. So now Vesa made his way around Yari H's body and is just pushed onward onto the S cave. Joining Patrick. Behind him, Kai and Yari Yu were struggling as Yari Yu got stuck somehow and needed some help. Now, what happened next was unclear as Kai was suffering from nitrogen narcosis. and was now very confused. Kai looked around and saw that Yaryu was spazzing out, swapping between his bailout unit and his rebreather. Yaryu hit the sides of the cave walls, kicking and thrashing. I mean, Kai just looked at him and he didn't know what to do. They were so far underwater and the confusion from the nitrogen was just settling in. Kai still looked around, dizzy and unable to do anything. Yari looked at Kai with the horror as water filled his mask. Kai watched as his friend took on water and drowned right before his eyes. Now Kai had to make a very hard choice like the other guys. He could try and risk going with Vesa or turn back around where he came from. The group now had 2 bodies of their friends between them and were also separated hundreds of meters underwater. Kai thought for a minute. He knew that it was shorter to turn back and, just swim where he came from. And so he decided to save himself and hope that the others would just be okay on their own. Meanwhile, Vesa pushed forward. Neither of the men knew the fate of the other. They were just trying to save themselves. Kai, now heading back the way he came, was sure that all 4 of his friends were dead. Low on oxygen, Kai knew that he would have to risk decompression sickness if he was going to have enough oxygen to make it out alive. Vesa obviously thought the same thing as well. They all had run out of time and they would have to face decompression or just flat out die in the cave. Now let's go back to our main man Patrick, who had begun his ascent way earlier, after the death of Yari H, obviously. He surfaced at 9 in the evening, and instead of the planned 5 hours for this dive, it took 8.5 hours. He sat down in the S cave, sure that all of his friends were dead. I mean, imagine that feeling. Just then, Vesa bursted out of the water and Patrick ran over to him, splashing back into the water and gave his friend the biggest hug ever. He was really sure that no one else made it out alive. The 2 men would never take breathing air for granted again. 3 hours later, on the other end of the cave, Kai returned to where they had chainsawed a hole into the ice, laughing and joking only a few hours before this. Only it wasn't so funny anymore. Kai realized in a horror that the hole had frozen shut. Jesus, hasn't this guy been through enough already? Kai screamed underwater and slammed his hand into the ice, trying to break it, and he was just holding back, sobbing. His joints were on fire from the decompression sickness, and his life flashed before his eyes. Had he come all this way just to die on the surface? Kai closed his eyes and gritted his teeth. He didn't come this far to die under the goddamn ice. With all of his might, he took off the parts of his own gear. The ice cracked a little bit, whack! Almost there, whack! Kai was able to break the ice and he pulled himself up. With over 11 hours underwater, Kai broke out of the ice and took the deepest breath of his life. Finally, he was safe. But back over to the farm, an exhausted Vesa and Patrick got dried and called the authorities. It was near 2 a.m. and they noticed that someone turned the van's lights on. They ran through the snow, yelling and excited to see who made it. Lying on the floor was Kai, who cried tears of joy seeing his other 2 friends. He really thought, again, that he was the only one who stayed alive. I can't even imagine what they felt on that day. Now, it doesn't stop here. Yes, this story keeps going. The 3 survivors were then all treated for decompression sickness, but there was still one problem that remained. The bodies of their friends were still underwater, trapped at the bottom of the cave. The authorities came up with a plan to retrieve them and called on 3 experienced British divers to carry out the recovery. In February, the recovery team descended through the S cave entrance. When they arrived at the bodies, they couldn't dislodge them and determined it was too dangerous, and decided to leave them there and close the cave forever. But obviously, the men weren't gonna just take the authorities' instructions and leave their friends laying down at the bottom of a goddamn cave. No, these guys decided to plan an illegal dive to recover their friends' bodies so that their families could mourn properly. Man, talk about some good friends. The recovery operation was kept a secret from the authorities, obviously because it was, illegal. Kind of like a heist. If you want to hear more about that, check out my badass heist video right here. Anyways, their illegal plan was to enter the cave from both ends, leaving 26 bailout cylinders within the cave. Yeah, littering was not one of their concerns. Now, Kai and Vesa did not re-enter the cave. Kai suffered severe anxiety as a result from the incident, and honestly, I don't really blame him. Vesa, who had the worst case of decompression sickness of the group, would suffer spinal problems that caused problems even walking, and now was unable to dive ever again. That left Patrick and another diver who was not in the original trip. by the name of Sammy to retrieve the bodies. The dive began, and only a few hours later, Patrick and Sammy were sad to find the dead bodies, right where they died only a few months before. Patrick and Sammy slowly got their friends out of where they were stuck, wrapped them in cords to the scooter, and made the several-hour swim back up to the surface. The following morning, Sammy called the police to tell them what they did. Now, he was on the phone saying they'd never broken the law and they just wanted to get the bodies out. But also, they needed help transporting the bodies out of the S-Cave. Despite the dive being illegal and drawing tons of media attention, no one was ever charged or even criticized for what they did. But if you want to hear about bank robbers that were never criticized for robbing a bank, click this video right here where I talk about robbers that executed perfect bank heists. And you stupid box said, do not forget to subscribe.